Welcome to Explosive Enterprises, and you've probably noticed that many of our videos feature airsoft or real guns with wood furniture, much of which we've refinished ourselves. A lot of wood furniture out there, particularly in airsoft, is made of decent quality wood but with poor finishes that often don't look all that nice. Fortunately, refinishing is easy with the right tools. Now for a bit of context, in the West, most military firearms were finished with boiled linseed oil or Tung oil, which requires weeks of curing followed by years to decades of oxidation and handling to develop the rich tones and glossy finish we associate with surplus firearms, all the while needing regular reapplication of oil for upkeep.
Ain't nobody got time for that!
In the Eastern Bloc, Soviet and Chinese firearms were typically finished with shellac, a resin excreted by beetles. This produces a thick, glossy finish with any color coming from the shellac itself rather than dyes or stains. However, this finish is not waterproof and is easily damaged in use, as we often see on surplus comblock rifles, with the intention being that the arsenal would periodically touch it up. Personally, I try to replicate the appearance of military finishes, but not the processes. With modern finishes, we can achieve the same looks, but with better durability and much less effort. Today I'll be working on a grip I recently bought from Kyber Customs. I like the design, and while the glossy finish looks appropriate for a comblock grip, I don't really like the rough grain on the sides. Now a lot of people will just start by sanding off the finish, but getting all of an existing finish out of the wood can require removing a lot of material and change the dimensions significantly. So instead I start with Citristrip, though really any chemical wood stripper will work. Following the instructions on the bottle, I glob this all over the wood, let it work for half an hour, and then scrub it off with a toothbrush. Well, it's certainly taking the finish off, though I foolishly placed it on a plastic lid which it has eagerly melted as well. After a second application, it's looking pretty clean, and I could be done here, but I'll give it a light scrub with acetone just to make sure any residual color is the wood and not trapped stain. Alright, now for sanding. Starting with 100 grit, I use a sanding block on the flat sides until they feel smooth. This takes a little while, but only because I'm actually removing that unwanted texture rather than just preparing it for refinishing. Once the sides are smooth, I sand the front, back, and bottom, which goes a lot quicker since I'm just going for an evenly sanded appearance. Now I can move up to 150 grit and repeat, smoothing out the surface a bit more. Time for whiskering. I wet the surface of the wood, which causes the grain to lift and the surface to become rough. Before I can sand further, I need to let it dry, so this is a good time to mention that a cheap food dehydrator can be used to accelerate drying and curing during this process. Once it dries, I sand it again, which knocks down the raised grain to smooth out the surface again. Next, I jump up to 400 grit and again sand smooth. This will be my final grit, and really 300 grit would be fine, I just didn't have any on hand. After the grip is fully smoothed out, I'll whisker it once more, this time going lightly just to take off the raised grain without impacting the surface beneath. Lastly, it gets a good scrub with a very slightly dampened paper towel to remove any residual sanding dust. Time for staining. As I mentioned before, most military finishes didn't use wood stain, but this is an easy way to get a rich color that penetrates into the wood and will stand up to wear. I'll be using Minwax Gunstock, an oil-based stain with a color I quite like, and I follow the instructions on the can. I use a foam brush to apply to the wood, and you can see how it immediately soaks into the grain, so I keep applying more until the surface stays visibly wet. I let it sit for 5 minutes, then use paper towels to vigorously scrub all the stain off the surface. Once that's done, the color that remains is just what's soaked into the wood. It'll need at least a few hours to dry, but as it does so, I check on it periodically and rub it down to remove any stain that is wicked up from the grain to the surface. Now here's where I have a decision to make. If I want a Soviet-style glossy finish, polyurethane is easy to apply and dries to a nice hard gloss. But for this project, I think I want more of an oil-rubbed look, the sort of finish that soaks into the wood and refracts light through it rather than encasing it in a glossy shell. To that end, I'll be using Tung Oil Finish, an annoyingly named product as it isn't Tung oil at all, but rather a mix of boiled linseed oil, mineral spirits, and drying aids. While this applies in the same manner as the stain, brushed on until it stops soaking in, giving it a few minutes to penetrate into the wood, and then vigorously buffing it off with paper towels. I give it at least a few hours to cure, and again check periodically to buff off any finish sweating out from the wood. Once it's cured, you can see that it has a little bit of shine, but not a whole lot. That's fine because I'm going to apply a few more layers, but this time applied a little differently. I use quadruple aught steel wool to apply the finish again, very gently rubbing it into the wood with circular patterns. This acts as a very mild abrasive to even out the previous layer and help the new layer soak into the pores. I only give this a minute or two to soak in, then buff the excess and again let it cure. After repeating the process once more, I have a nice shine in the wood, and now it's time for something maybe a little controversial. I could call this done right here, it's sealed and ready to go. But while the color and finish look nice, it also looks brand new. Wood furniture that's used in the field will pick up oil from handling and cleaning, which collects in the pores and oxidizes along with trapping dirt and grime, turning dark and adding depth to the appearance. I'm going to shortcut this process with a little bit of artist's oil paint, a mix of burnt umber and black, and rub this into the wood. No need to let it soak, I just buff off as much as I can with the paper towels, leaving the pigment collected in the pores. And that's it, this grip is done. You can see that the end result looks very different from the walnut handguard despite following the exact same process, which goes to show how different woods will react differently both to the stain and finish. There's an element of unpredictability to wood refinishing, and honestly, I think I'd prefer if this grip came out a little darker. So I actually scrubbed the grip with acetone to strip the finish off but leave the stain intact, and then applied dark brown leather dye in the same manner as the stain. This doesn't soak into the grain as well, so I don't like it as a finish on its own, but it can be used to augment an existing stain. Once that dried, I repeated the process of finishing with a Tung oil finish and oil paint, and the end result is a richer reddish orange that I'm quite pleased with. Worst case, if I really hated the outcome, I could just dunk it in the paint stripper and try again with a darker stain, and the second time would go faster since it would need much less sanding. It's hard to permanently screw up wood furniture, so there's no harm in experimenting and seeing what you like and dislike. While modern polymers have rendered wood furniture entirely obsolete, there's an old world charm to it, and a good set of furniture greatly elevates a rifle. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this video, and as always, thanks for watching.